In an continuation of does Jesus associate with the disinherited? In a continuation of the subject, does Jesus associate with the disinherited, coming from Howard Thurman's book, Jesus and the Disinherited? He starts out by saying in his book, Jesus had to resent deeply the loss of Jewish national independence and the aggression of Rome. Natural humiliation was hurting and burning. The balm for that burning humiliation was humility, for humility cannot be humiliated. Thus he asked his people to learn from him, for I am meek and lowly in heart, and ye shall find rest unto your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. It was but natural that such a position would be deeply resented by many of his fellows, who were suffering even as he was. To them it was a complete betrayal to the enemy. It was to them a counsel of consequence, if not of despair, full to overflowing with a kind of groveling and stark cowardness. Besides, it seemed like self-deception, like whistling in the dark. All of this would have been quite true if Jesus had stopped there. He did not. He recognized with authentic realism that anyone who permits another to determine the quality of his inner life gives into the hands of the other the keys to his destiny. So in essence, we cannot give in to those who oppress us. We must be stronger than that individual. He says, if a man knows precisely what he can do to you, or what epithet he can hurl against you in order to make you lose your temper, your equilibrium, then he can always keep you under subjection. We don't want that to happen. It is a man's reaction to things that determines their ability to exercise power over him. It seems clear that Jesus understood the anatomy of the relationship between his people and the Romans, the oppressors, and he interpreted that relationship against the background of the profoundest ethical insight of his own religious faith as he had found it in the heart of the peoples of Israel. The solution which Jesus found for himself and for Israel as they faced the hostility of the Greco-Roman world becomes the word and work of redemption for all the cast down people in every generation and in every age. I mean this quite literally. He says, Thurman goes on to say, I do not ignore the theological and metaphysical interpretation of the Christian doctrine of salvation, but the underprivileged everywhere have long since abandoned any hope that this type of salvation deals with the crucial issues by which their days are turned into despair without consolation. So we got to look to Jesus and how he provided salvation through his death, burial, and resurrection. The basic fact is that Christianity, as it was born in the mind of this Jewish teacher and thinker, appears as a technique of survival for the oppressed. Now we're going to look at this further. It says that it became, though the intervening years, a religion of the powerful and the dominant, used sometimes as an instrument of oppression, which Christianity was used to oppress us. We do know that historically. he says here, he says, even though it was used sometimes as an instrument of oppression, must not tempt us into believing that it was thus in the mind and life of Jesus. So it wasn't, Jesus didn't think of what it is that he taught to be oppressive. In essence, it's actually liberating. So let's look a little further. He says, in him was life, and the life was the light of men. Wherever his spirit appears, the oppressed gathered fresh courage, for he announced the good news that fear, hypocrisy, and hatred, the three hounds of hell that track the trail of the disinherited, need have no dominion over them. Let me say that again. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. Wherever his spirit appears, the oppressed gathered fresh courage. That's what we ought to be doing, gathering fresh courage. For he announced the good news that fear, hypocrisy, and hatred, the three hounds of hell that track the trail of the disinherited, have no dominion over them. He goes on to say that I belong. He says, goes on to say, I belong to a generation that finds very little that is meaningful or intelligent in the teachings of the church concerning Jesus Christ. It is a generation largely in revolt because of the general impression that Christianity is essentially an otherworldly religion, having as its motto, take all the world but give me Jesus. This desperate opposition to Christianity rests in the fact that it seems in the last analysis to be a portrayal of the Negro into the hands of his enemies by focusing his attention upon heaven, forgiveness, love, and the like. And it's all right to be heavenly minded, but we got to be mindful. We have to be mindful that the scriptures that it's not only things will be better by and by, but to look at the present. How does the word of God empower us and encourage us in today's times? It says it is true that this emphasis is germane to the religion of Jesus, but it has to be put into a context that will show its strength and vitality rather than its weakness and failure. For years it has been part of my own quest so to understand the religion of Jesus that interest in his way of life could be developed and sustained by intelligent men and women who were at the same time deeply victimized by the Christian church betrayal of its faith. My Lord, during much of my boyhood, Thurman says, I was cared for by my grandmother, who was born a slave and lived until the Civil War on a plantation in Madison, Florida. My regular chore was to do all of the reading for my grandmother. She could neither read nor write. 2 or 3 times a week I read the Bible aloud to her. I was deeply impressed by the fact that she was most particular about the choice of scripture. For instance, I might read many of the more devotional songs, some of Isaiah, the Gospels again and again, but the Pauline epistles never, except at long intervals, the 13th chapter of 1 Corinthians. My curiosity knew no bounds, but we did not question her about anything. When I was older and was half through college, I chanced to be spending a few days at home near the end of the summer vacation. With a feeling of great timidity, I asked her one day why it was that she would not let me read any of the Pauline letters. What she told me I should never forget. During the days of slavery, she said, the master minister would occasionally hold services for the slaves. Old man McGee was so mean that he would not let a Negro minister preach to his slaves. And I learned that in seminary when we went and I did an immersion down to South Carolina and visited the Geechee people. And they told us similar stories of how they had to go off into the churches out back up in the woods and have services there. It says always the white minister used as his text something from Paul at least 3 or 4 times a year. He used as a text, slaves, be obedient to them that are your masters as unto Christ. Then he would go on to show how it was God's will that we were slaves, and how if we were good and happy slaves, God will bless us. I promised my Maker that if I ever learned to read, and if freedom ever came, I would not read that part of the Bible. Since that fearful day on the front porch in Florida, I have been working on the problem her words presented. A part of the fruits of that search throw an important light upon the issues with which I am dealing. It cannot be denied that too often the weight of a Christian movement has been on the side of the strong and the powerful and against the weak and oppressed, this despite the gospel. A part of the responsibility seems to me to rest upon a peculiar twist in the psychology of Paul, whose wide and universal concerns certainly included all men, bond and free. Let us examine the facts. Let us examine the facts. The Apostle Paul was a Jew. He was the first great creative interpreter of Christianity. His letters are older than the Gospels themselves. It seems that because he was not one of the original disciples, he was never quite accepted by them as one able to speak with authority concerning the Master. This fact hung very heavily upon the soul of the apostle. He did not ever belong quite. One of the disciples could always say, but of course you do not quite understand, because you see you were not there when. But the fact remains, Paul was a Jew, even as Jesus was a Jew. By blood, training, background, and religion, he belonged to the Jewish minority about whom we have been speaking. But unlike them, for the most part, he was a free Jew. He was a citizen of Rome. This is Paul. A desert and a sea were placed between his status in the empire and that of his fellow Jews. A very searching dilemma was created by this fact. On the other hand, he belonged to the privileged class. He had the freedom of the empire at his disposal. There were certain citizenship rights which he could claim despite his heritage, faith, and religion. Should he deny himself merely because he was more fortunate than his fellows? To what extent could he accept his rights without feeling a deep sense of guilt and betrayal? He was of a minority, but with majority privileges. This is the Apostle Paul. If a Roman soldier in some prison in Asia Minor was taking advantage of him, he could make an appeal directly to Caesar. There was always available to him a protection guaranteed by the state and respected by the minions of the state. It was like a magic formula, always available in emergencies. That's the life that Paul lived. This is good to get this historical background of the Apostle Paul. It is to the credit of the amazing power of Jesus Christ over the life of Paul that there is only one recorded instance in which he used his privilege. It is quite understandable that his sense of security would influence certain aspects of his philosophy and history. Yes. Even though he wrote and the Spirit moved on his heart to write, he still was contextually, he was a part of that society. Naturally, he would have regard for the state, for the civil magistrate, unlike that of his fellows, who regarded them as the formal expression of legitimized intolerance. The stability of Paul's position in the state was guaranteed by the integrity of the state. One is not surprised then to hear him tell slaves to obey their masters like Christ, and say all government is ordained of God, because of where he act because of his position. This is very good, because of his position as a Roman citizen. This is why he wrote in such a way. It is not to meet the argument to say that in a sense everything that is permitted of God, or that government and rulers are sustained by God as a concession to the frailty of man. It would be grossly misleading and inaccurate to say that there are not to be found in the Pauline letters utterances of a deeply different quality, utterances which reveal how his conceptional transcended all barriers of race, class, and condition. But this other side is there, always available to those who wish to use the weight of the Christian message to oppress and humiliate their followers. The point is that this aspect of Paul's teaching is understandably against the background of his Roman citizenship. Yes, it influenced his philosophy of history and resulted in a major frustration that has borne bitter fruit in the history of the movement which he, Paul, did so much to project on the conscience of the human race. Now, Jesus was not a Roman citizen. He was not protected by the natural guarantees of citizenship, that quiet sense of security which comes from knowing that you belong, and the general climate of confidence which it inspires. If a Roman soldier pushed Jesus into a ditch, he could not appeal to Caesar. He could be just another Jew in the ditch, standing always beyond the reach of citizen security. He was particularly exposed to all the arrows of outrageous fortune, and there was only a gratuitous refuge, if any, within the state, was stark insecurity. What a breeder of complete civil and moral nihilism and psychotic anarchy, unless one actually lives day by day without a sense of security. He cannot understand what worlds separated Jesus from Paul at this point. The striking similarity between the social position of Jesus in Palestine and that of the vast majority of American Negroes is obvious to anyone who tarries long over the facts. We are dealing here with conditions that produce essentially the same psychology. There is meant no further comparison. It is the similarity of a social climate at the point of a denial of full citizenship, which creates the problem for creative survival. For the most part, Negroes assume that there are no basic citizenship rights, no fundamental protection guaranteed to them by the state, because their status as citizens has never been clearly defined. There has been for them little protection from the dominant controllers of society, and even less protection from the unstrained elements within their own group. The result has been a tendency, listen to this, to be their own protectors, to bulwark themselves against careless and deliberate aggression. The Negro has felt with some justification that the peace officer of the community provides no defense against the offending or offensive white man, and for an entirely different set of reasons, the peace officer gives no protection against the offending Negro. And we see right today with the police brutality and the treatment of people of color, we see this playing out right in our very, very present. It says the Negro has felt with some justification that the peace officer of the community provides no defense against the offending or offensive white man, and for an entirely different set of reasons, the peace officer gives no protection against the offending Negro. Thus, the Negro feels that he must be prepared at a moment's notice to protect his own life and take the consequence thereof. Such a predicament has made it natural for some of them to use weapons as a defense and to have recourse to premeditated or precipitate violence. Living in a climate of deep insecurity, Jesus, faced with so narrow a margin of civil guarantees, had to find some other basis upon which to establish a sense of well-being. He knew that the goals of religion, as he understood them, could never be worked out within the then established order. Deep from within that order, he projected a dream, the logic of which would give to all the needful security. There would be room for all, and no man would be a threat to his brother. The kingdom of God is within. The Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to preach the gospel to the poor. That's when Jesus went into the temple and picked up the book of Isaiah, and he read these words. The basic principle of his life, of his way of life, cut straight through to the despair of his fellows and found it groundless. By inference, he says, you must abandon your fear of each other and fear only God. You must not indulge in any deception and dishonesty, even to save your life. Your words must be yea and nay. Anything else is what? Evil. Hatred is destructive to hatred and hater alike. Love your enemy, that you may be children of your Father who is in heaven. We're going to end right there, and we will pick up with chapter 2 on the subject of fear. Thank you so much for joining us. Please subscribe to my channel. Please go to my website, Reverend Anthony Owens.info. Go to my website, Reverend R-E-V Anthony ANTHONY Owens OWENS.info for info.info. And please subscribe to my YouTube channel. We're trying to build this community. We are asking the questions that would be so beneficial to all of us, especially in our Christian walk. So many people are asking questions, given what we have dealt with this pandemic, all that's going on in the world. People are searching for answers, and this website, my website is answering questions, and so I need to know what questions that you would like to have answered. So please subscribe to my YouTube channel. I'm on all social media, Facebook. I have a Facebook group page under Reverend Anthony Owens. You can find me in my group page on Facebook. I'm on Instagram, and I'm also on Twitter, Reverend Anthony Owens Ministries. I'm on all social media platforms. God bless you, and may God keep you. Please, I look forward to seeing you. God bless.